Okay, so we finished up the connective tissue. Now let's look at epithelial tissue. The epithelial tissue, or the epithelium, is a sheet-like tissue that covers and protects most surfaces inside and outside the body. You may know that our skin is part of our epithelium. But there is also epithelial tissue lining most of our organs inside the body. It has a few different functions. It offers some physical protection, but also helps us regulate the movement of molecules into and out of the body or organs. So it's providing protection from and regulation of chemicals as well. It also is responsible for secretion of a lot of different substances. For example, sweat is secreted by the epithelial cells making up our skin. We mentioned that the epithelium helps us regulate the movement of molecules across surfaces. It does this by having layers of very densely packed cells. Because these cells are so close together, there's no room for anything to squeeze between them. Instead, if a substance wants to get through our skin or another epithelial layer, it needs to pass through the individual cells in the layer. So these cells can act as gatekeepers, deciding what gets in or out. One example of how an epithelium inside the body protects us is the epithelium that lines the stomach. It keeps stomach acid from leaking out of the stomach, which would damage our other organs. In the intestines, the epithelium controls what molecules leave the digestive system and enter the blood to be transported around the body. So the epithelium protects us from substances that might otherwise enter our bodies or travel across organs. But it also gives us some physical protection. The skin cushions our bodies and protects our organs from damage. If you get a shallow cut, the skin takes the blow so that your internal organs are protected. We also mentioned that the epithelium has another function, secretion. It does this by forming glands, which are specialized to secrete either hormones or other substances into or onto the body. There are two different types of glands. Exocrine glands produce substances that are secreted onto the surface of the epithelium. Our exocrine glands secrete several different substances onto our skin, such as sweat or earwax. But we also have internal exocrine glands that secrete substances onto epithelial surfaces inside the body. For example, your salivary glands are exocrine glands that secrete saliva onto the epithelium lining your mouth. Milk is also secreted by exocrine glands. Some animals have other types of secretions, such as poisons. Endocrine glands are a little different. They secrete hormones, and they secrete them directly into the blood or other body fluids to be circulated around the body. Now answer this participation question. And one more before we go on. Okay, now let's move on to our third tissue type, muscle. Muscle tissue allows us to move our bodies. It's made up of elongated cells that have the ability to contract. There are three different types of muscle tissue. The most familiar is probably skeletal muscles. These muscles not only move our skeleton, allowing us to walk or wave our hands, they also control breathing. The cells in skeletal muscle tissue are known as muscle fibers. So if you hear the term muscle fiber, what they're actually talking about are the individual cells making up the muscle tissue. Muscle fibers are long cells with multiple nuclei. Skeletal muscles are usually both innervated and striated, which we'll talk about in a second. They may be controlled consciously, so I can decide whether to take a step forward, or they might be unconscious. I don't have to think about breathing, it just happens unconsciously. So we mentioned that skeletal muscles are innervated, which means there are nerve cells connected to the muscle fibers. These nerve cells send electrical signals to the muscle, telling it when to contract and when to relax. So if I decide to raise my arm, what's actually happening is my nervous system is sending an electrical signal to the muscles in my arm, causing those muscles to contract and move my arm. Skeletal muscles are also striated, which means if you look at them under a microscope, you'll see a striped pattern. These stripes form because the muscles are made up of repeating units of muscle fibers. Okay, now let's talk about smooth muscle, which can be found in our digestive system, blood vessels, and other organs. They're controlled unconsciously and move substances through organs and organ systems. So we don't have to think about moving food through our digestive system. Contractions of the smooth muscles in our intestines push the food along. Smooth muscle cells are spindle-shaped and only have a single nucleus. These muscles aren't innervated. They don't rely on the nervous system to tell them when to contract and relax. Instead, they contract slowly and rhythmically, again, to move food through the digestive system or to move blood through our blood vessels. And finally, we have cardiac muscles, which are responsible for pumping blood into and out of the heart. Like the smooth muscles, they are controlled unconsciously. It would be terrible if we had to remember to keep our heart beating. However, they are striated like skeletal muscles, so we see that striped pattern. Cardiac muscles contain extra mitochondria because they need to produce a lot of energy to keep the heart beating and functioning well. However, they do rely on the nervous system, in this case the automatic nervous system, to signal them to contract. They also have special structures called gap junctions. Gap junctions are connections between the cells in cardiac muscle. Because all the cells are interconnected in this way, it's much more efficient for electrical signals from the nervous system to pass through the tissue and cause them all to contract at the same time. This is very important for the function of the heart. Now answer this question. And finally, we're going to talk about our fourth tissue type, nervous tissue. Nervous tissue's function is to transmit information. It allows animals like us to sense our environment and respond to it. The nervous system is made up of two different systems, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system innervates the rest of the body where it detects stimuli and transmits signals to the muscles and glands in response. The central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system are in communication with each other. The peripheral system detects stimuli and sends that information to the central nervous system, which interprets it and then sends a signal back to the peripheral system so it can trigger a response. The nervous system is made up of cells called neurons, which are specialized to send and receive electrical signals. Neurons have three parts: a dendrite, a cell body, and an axon. The cell body is the part of the neuron where the nucleus and other organelles are located. It maintains the cell and keeps it functioning. The dendrites are branches off the cell body. They function as the antenna system of the neuron and receive signals coming in. After a signal is received from the dendrite, it can be transmitted by the axon, which is a long projection off the cell. You can remember that axons transmit signals by thinking axon away. However, neurons aren't the only cells in the nervous system. There are also cells called glial cells surrounding neurons. They don't transmit signals. Instead, they insulate, protect, and nourish the neurons. And two more questions before we finish this.